Police officers, cops of Reddit who solved paranormal cases getting calls because of paranormal disturbances. What actually happened? A bit of a different take on this. TLDR. Officer gets spooked by native artifact, almost kills a man, then moves away. We had a neighbor, next door to next door, that was a police officer. His son was like 4 years older than me, but we'd hang out from time to time. Mr. Officer was a very kind-hearted individual and was the boon of our little neighbor community. One weeknight at like 2 AM, our doorbell rings. My dad gets his gun and looks through the peep, only to see it's Mr. Officer and his family. They ended up staying the night. His son and much younger, like toddler, sister stayed in the guest room and Mrs. Officer slept on our couch. Mr. Officer talked with my dad outside for a minute, then went back to his house. The next day, they went back home. They moved away the next week and that was that. According to my mom, here's what happened. Mrs. Officer, a woman of half Native American descent, father lived on a Nebraska territory, went to visit her family, and came back with this talisman. It was like an oversized piece of jewelry. I never actually saw it, so that's the best description I got. She hung it in their bedroom. Mr. Officer started hearing things soon after. Footsteps, talking, electronics turning on and off, all when no one else was home. Obviously, being an officer, he was well prepared to deal with intruders or whatnot, but he never found anybody. Then he started seeing things, dark shapes around corners, various things in the peripheral, and one particular instance of a very large shark in their swimming pool. Mr. Officer had a horrible fear of the ocean, and sharks in particular. Their young daughter would talk about dreams she had, very bizarre things that sounded, for lack of a better word, prophetic. It was about 2 months after the talisman was brought in that he brought his family over that one night. He had heard all these disturbances very frequently this past day, and felt the need to face it alone. He ended up shooting an intruder in the chest with his service pistol. The intruder was the brother of a man Mr. Officer had recently arrested. He broke in through the back by climbing a tree and breaking into the little girl's room. Mr. Officer found him in their master bedroom, likely searching for the family. He had an illegal, silenced firearm, and was likely planning to kill the family for putting his brother in jail. To me, it feels like the talisman warned Mr. Officer about this impending threat. They ended up moving because he got in a big dispute with the police for using his service pistol when off duty. This would make an awesome movie. We used to be issued a spray called Mycleans. It was a small pen-sized spray you used on yourself if you got exposed to blood that was supposed to lower the risk of contracting disease. We had a woman who would always call in about monsters trying to poison her food, or people living in her air ducts redirecting her AC to the neighbor's units. Sad part is 99% of these calls are people with serious mental issues. Once in a blue moon, a paranormal call is someone who heard something real but their mind couldn't process that their home was being broken into or something like that. Anyways, back to the monsters in the spray. Lady's son made her a cake for her birthday but she was alone. She called very upset because a monster had laced her birthday cake with cyanide. She wanted us to kill the monster for her. My partner pulls out his spray, sprays the cake with it once, and tells her that it's a special cyanide detecting spray, and that the cake will put off a green smoke if it isn't safe to eat. I pulled out my taser, switched the safety off, and told her the safety toggles it between the realms of man and the supernatural. Then I went into another room, dry fired it a couple times. You can fire a taser without deploying the probes to test the current, and came back. We told her I had killed the monster and she was safe. Sometimes it's all about just making the customer happy. Astronomer here, not a cop, obviously, but in a reverse of this question, I did talk about paranormal stuff with one the summer I worked at the SETI Institute, a big science research institute in California devoted to extraterrestrial life. I was with a group from work heading back from the Allen Telescope Array, and we were pulled over as the driver was speeding. The trooper asked us what we were from, and when we said we were doing a summer internship at SETI etc, the guy started talking about his cousin in Texas who saw lights in the sky from aliens. It was awkward as he was so stern until that moment, but someone brazenly said sorry, we only look for real aliens, which made us all laugh, cop included, so we got off with a warning. It was definitely an interesting summer. Cop, that's so funny. I hunt for aliens too, illegal ones. Open the trunk. Was just house sitting for my grandparents while they were on holiday. Asked the neighbor, around 50 years old, across the way to keep an eye on the house as well. Just phoned me if anything was odd or suspicious. Get a call around dark that there's men on their roof. Thought they might be trying to burgle the place professionally, sneaking through the attic or something. Phoned the police and rushed over. Found nothing. Few days later get another call. This time around 3 PM. Same deal, gents on the roof. Figure it's bright out. No way she's mistaken, so go through the whole ordeal again. Rush over. Phone the cops. They clear the house. Find nothing. This time the neighbor and I are taken separately for long questioning with the police over valuables, potential disgruntled employees, etc. They are taking this very seriously. Final blow came from the police themselves. They told the neighbor to phone them first, not me, which is what I had told her, if she saw anything again. Well, they had someone watching the street. They figured someone was casing the house to rob it and were just waiting for the right time. So she calls and there is no one on the roof. No one there. Police or nobody. Even another neighbor says absolutely nobody is out there. So they finally start asking this neighbor some mental health questions, thinking she might be a bit off. We'd known her for ages. Knew she was fine. That's why we trusted her to watch the house. Turns out she had some neck-back surgery right before my grandparents left for their holiday, and she was on massive amounts of medication, and drinking with them to boot. Couldn't tell talking to her. That was the real scary thing. Thank God she didn't drive and stayed home. She just was off her tea on pills and drink and was literally seeing things. Had a guy in his late 80s that lived alone that would call us because aliens were trying to get him. I would always take that call because no one wanted to go. It usually went, hey, no one is coming for you, then leave. I decided to see what was up. Went out in his backyard with him and he said just watch. So we sat in his backyard and watched the stars. Just talked to the guy. Super smart, just lonely and seemed to be getting crazy. After a few months of random calls to his house he stopped. I rolled out one night because I missed my 20 minutes of stargazing with him and he didn't answer. From our talks I knew his wife had died about 10 years before and they never had kids. He was totally alone, so no one cared. I kept knocking and getting really worried. Called my LT to come by and see what I could do. We finally agreed that I could try and find windows open or anything since his yard was out of control and we could safely say something was wrong. I got into the house and was absolutely dreading finding his body. A quick walk through and I didn't find anything, so I opened the door and let the other officers in. A search through his house found nothing. Nothing seemed out of place or missing. All the doors were locked and only 2 windows were unlocked, but nothing out of place around there minus the dirt I tracked in. After a few minutes my LT found a note attached to the fridge. It pretty much said, "Officer, they told me I couldn't wait for you. I'm sorry you missed them, but I will see you soon." Old guy. He never came back and we never found a body. His house was in the center of town, so it's not like he ran off into the woods. His car was there. I left the department a year afterwards, but it's still a mystery to everyone there. I sometimes think about that and wonder what the crap actually happened. A lot of the time with apparent possession it's due to something called acute behavioral disorder, ABD. ABD is an umbrella term for episodical-like events where a person seems to act completely different to how normal humans act. Examples of ABD behavior can be speaking absolute gibberish, having seemingly inhuman strength, and having an extremely high pain threshold. This can be brought on by drugs, mental health, or a variety of different things, breakdowns, stress, etc. Often what happens is their heart rate goes to the peak, and as they are in a manic state they don't stop, leading to their body heating up, where they will often take off clothes to cool down, and can eventually lead to death if they are extremely unlucky. If you Google excited delirium you will find many examples of ABD. Some of them seem honestly demonic. There was this case of this guy who climbed on a roof and started throwing tiles from the roof into a schoolyard at kids and cars. Eventually the police were called to reason with him, and at the point he thought it would be best to jump from the roof onto a parked car which was about a 15-meter drop underneath him. He then proceeded to get up and run at the police while screaming absolute gibberish and crying. Unbeknownst to him or the police, he had actually broke a femur, smashed his ankle to bits and fractured all his ribs, but he was still running. It's insane. It turns out he had taken a legal high at the time called methadone, which had badly reacted with him, leading to this manic episode. A couple years ago, when I was still serving as a corrections officer, I was assigned to work the assessment center housing unit for males. It was third shift, so I was alone with the exception of about 90 inmates. Most of them were passed out or groaning from detox, so it wasn't exactly a setting where it would be difficult to be skeptical of any bizarre sounds. However, around 3 AM as I was doing my rounds along the main floor, I could hear the sounds of a cell door slamming shut repeatedly. Being in a direct supervision facility, the units are set up to where the officer can see every single cell and day room door from the main floor. All of them were shut, and yet the sound persisted, and no, there was no way they were coming from another unit. Walls were too thick between housing units. This woke several inmates, many of whom began to panic when they realized there was no source for the sound and they were not the only ones to hear it. I could have probably pretended I didn't hear it to discredit their anxiety, but I tried to be a straight shooter and just reassured them of their safety. No sense in lying to people, even if some of them are scumbags. A short while later, maybe about 3:40 AM, I could hear the sound of handcuffs ratcheting. Made me double check to ensure my cuffs were secured on my belt. As I walked around to investigate the noise and made my way toward the visitation windows, I saw a figure sitting in the booth through the window. I approached thinking that maybe I left it unsecured and an inmate wandered inside, but as I opened the door I found it empty. Keep in mind, unless the guy could teleport, there was no way he was walking out without opening the door right in front of me. Furthermore, the door was locked, with no mechanism to unlock it from the inside. Needless to say, I hated working the male assessment center. Although I'm not a police officer, we did have a funny occurrence when working with the UK government on assignment to one of their offices to train some staff. We were staying in a hotel for a few months, and one day, in the early hours of the morning, whilst sat sharing a few drinks and a big bowl of chips with the night warden, we were disturbed by an utterly blood-curdling scream. One of those that stands your hairs on the back of your neck on end. Followed by another and another. Typically, as a bunch of big lads in our 20s, we decided that once the police had been called, we'd go with the warden and get involved. After all, it sounded like someone was in real trouble and we couldn't just sit and wait. With the warden's help, we quickly found the room in question. All the while the screaming continued. We knocked loudly on the door, demanded it be opened, and when the only response was another scream, decided we were going in. The warden unlocked the door and a boot from one of us broke the little chain, and the 5 of us piled in expecting to see something out of a horror movie. Instead, we found a businessman in his mid-50s, alone, cowering in the corner in the midst of a clearly horrific night terror. The fact he was wearing a rather raunchy little black lady's lingerie set, high heels and a blonde wig didn't really sink in for a few seconds after the adrenaline started to subside. We smiled, apologized for the intrusion and left him to it, quietly giggling as the warden cancelled the 999 call. The poor guy arrived for breakfast the following morning, in a very expensive suit, looking rather sheepish. That night when we got to the bar, the warden explained that the beers were on the blonde. The guy had left £100 behind the bar for us, presumably as payment never to tell his story. Sorry mate, but thanks for the beer. When I first became an officer for a small village, I received a call for harassment at an apartment. When I got on scene, I made contact with the caller, a middle-aged man. We'll call him John. John told me that when he returned home from work, he found a disturbing message in his bedroom. I went into the bedroom and he showed me to his dresser. The words "Get out now" were carved into the wood on top of the dresser. It was a jagged carving and didn't look like it was done by a knife but with a fingernail. John told me that he keeps his wallet on the dresser, and when he grabbed it before he left, the carving wasn't there. I asked John if he had any kids that could have done this as a prank, and he said he has a daughter but she's only 4 years old and can't reach the top of the dresser. Plus he added that his daughter and ex-wife were on vacation and have been gone for 3 days. I asked who all lives with him or if anyone has access to his apartment, and he said he has a key and the manager of the complex has a key, but that's it. I asked if there were any signs of a break-in or if anything was missing, and he said no. I photographed the dresser and the carving and told him to call back if anything else happened. Never heard from John again, and I'm pretty sure he moved out. It's been about 7 years since that call and it still creeps me out a little bit. Not me, but my friend is a cop in a major Canadian metropolitan and one night that we were supposed to go out after his shift we decided to pick me up in his cop car. Since he was almost finished his shift and was just going to drop the car back at the depot. On the way though he got a call that someone was complaining about noises coming from their basement that sounded like a person. So he decided to make that his last stop. I was told to wait in the car while he talked with homeowner and checked it out. He was gone for about half an hour before we came back and had this terrified amazed face on him. Apparently the homeowner was hearing loud thuds from his basements for a couple of weeks, but on the day of the call they were really loud and scaring him. He had a walk-in basement so he thought maybe someone had broken in. My friend goes to the basement to check it out with the homeowner. Basement is all dark and the lights need to be turned on from the electrical panel. So they get to the panel and my friend says he saw something in the corner of his eye. He turns around and at an end of a hallway which leads to a cold storage he sees a guy facing the door of the cold storage just standing there. He yells at the guy to turn around but he doesn't. Homeowner sees him too and is scared. Friend asks the guy to turn around once more before hitting the switch for the lights and the guy ghost at the cold storage just disappears when the lights come on. My friend swore that he searched every inch of that basement and could not find anyone else there. Homeowner is shook up and says he's gonna stay with a friend for a night and my friend calls another cop to surveil the house to see if anyone tries to enter the main house or basement. Not sure what happened after but my friend swears he saw someone in that basement. Was driving along and found a girl just standing in the middle of the road. My initial thoughts was to just tell her to pay attention but it was clear that while the lights were on, nobody was home. During my whole time with her she never uttered a word. I was left in a weird situation. She had done nothing, clearly needed help but medically nothing seemed wrong. As I am pondering what on earth I should do the girl suddenly starts spinning. Now spinning is not illegal and I'm starting to think this girl is one of those protesters that wind up police so I think crack on. Spin to your heart's content. Then she loses her balance and falls whacking her head on the side of the police car. Great. So I call an ambulance but she seems fine. Still not talking but she is looking up at the sky. It's a nice day so fine enjoy the view. I do some writing and look back at her now bright red face and watering eyes and realize she is trying to damage her retinas by forcing herself to look at the sun. That's a new one on me so now I'm holding a book or something above her to shield her eyes. Ambulance arrives and we get to hospital and now she has forgotten how to walk. Now I'm 99% sure she is a wind-up merchant but I get her a wheelchair. In the wheelchair she strikes up I'm a little teapot pose and keeps this up for the next hour. Zero movement just frozen with her arms out. So I now have 3 potential situations. 1. She is pretending to be frozen in time. 2. She is suffering from a mental health issue. 3. She has been possessed. By now I'm convinced it's the latter but I section her and leave her with professionals. A week later I call the hospital and they tell me she is still frozen. Actually sounds like she went catatonic. We had been fielding numerous calls from a woman who suffered from some type of mental illness. She claimed people and spirits were stalking her and disturbing her and all sorts of wild things. Her family refused to help her or help us help her. It was really pitiful that the family wouldn't even get involved to assist with her obvious mental health issues. Her calls to 911 were constant and our policy dictates we respond if a call is made. So one night we were very busy and she called complaining of crazy spirits bothering her and coming through the cracks in her walls and stuff like that. I acted very serious when I arrived and had a new officer with me training him. I bummed a cigarette off him and said watch this. I told this woman to stay outside with the officer while I went and confronted the spirit. I went to the back of the house and then outside the back door. I lit the cigarette and blew smoke into a Coke bottle and closed the lid. I came back into the house and out into the front yard with the officer and her. I held the bottle far out from me and said I had the spirit contained and we had to leave to release it in the proper place. She was ecstatic and we left. We didn't get a call back from her for over a year. I left the patrol division by the time she started calling back. My so's dad was a police officer and has a ton of tales. So he was based in the Isle of Man, where there is next to no crime but a history of paranormal sightings. One night he was sent to Bar George, a bar, obviously, but based in this incredibly old building. I think an old government building, and the owners were complaining about disturbances whenever they would close up for the night. He got there and swears that when the tenants flicked the lights off to leave, tables could be heard being dragged around in the pitch black. These huge metal tables that screeched when dragged. Whenever the lights were back on, it would stop. So obviously there's not a whole lot that he could do, but he looked into it and turns out that the building was actually used as a temporary morgue after a lot of people were killed in a huge fire. The current morgue couldn't actually hold that many. Apparently the owners couldn't take it anymore, so they sold the place. Then the next bar owner manager ended up moving the light switches into the vestibule so he could lock the place up and turn the lights off from outside without having to deal with whatever was going on. He has loads of stories though. If enough people want to hear more, I'll try get them posted. So someone very close to me works military intel. In the late 90s, a civilian who worked at one of the commissaries on a base in the desert of NM was investigated BC. He died in very bizarre circumstances and worked on base. He had started going on and on about Satan's minions who were apparently chasing him. He started to get so upset about it that he just quit coming to work one day. A couple of days later, his body was found in a local motel room. The housekeeping found his body when they noticed flooding from under the motel room door. They opened the door to find his body dead in the bathtub, underwater, with the tub water on. In the room they found the bed was moved to create a huge religious shrine with candles still burning. The autopsy was really bizarre. BC, the cause of death was listed as fear, which nobody had ever heard of being a cause of death before. He didn't have an obvious cause of death, so fear was sort of the de facto cause. Couple of weeks later, military intel was called out to the desert where huge pictures, wouldn't tell me what of, were found out in the desert near the base that were made of thousands of piled up rocks. The person who told me about this said they were most likely related but wouldn't tell me why. I have no doubt this is all exactly as it happened, as the person involved doesn't joke around. It was all just really bizarre. Many moons ago, when I worked security, I was assigned to a business in an industrial park that had a variety of businesses around it. One Saturday afternoon, I leave the building to do a grounds check, and as I walk around the side of the building, I see this large tiger resting against the side of the building. Now, this is in Alberta and tigers are not part of the local wildlife, so at first I wasn't quite sure I was seeing what I was seeing. My first thought, after the initial reaction, was how to write this up in such a way that I am not immediately ordered to provide a urine sample. After staring at the tiger for a bit, I realize that he is actually wearing a collar and has a small steel cable acting as a leash, and it is tied to a tree about 100 feet or so away. No one was around and I certainly didn't want to test the friendliness of the tiger, so I decided to skip that side of the building on my rounds. Every now and then I would wander out and see if he was still there, and after my third wander, there was a group of people standing around and a gentleman was holding the tiger. He allowed people to approach the tiger, individually and one at a time only, and from the front. The tiger didn't like surprises. I actually did get to meet the tiger and actually petted it. Beautiful animal. After a few quick questions, it was determined that the tiger belonged to a stripper performing at the local strip joint beside the building I was assigned to. The tiger actually belonged to her and the gentleman was the tiger's full-time handler. And for those curious, no urine sample needed. A quick internet search confirmed everything that I had written in my notes. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.